All right, everybody, welcome. My name's Matt Stefan. I'm part of the leadership team here at Dwell Church. I'm thrilled to be here with you all. What a delight to just be singing. It sounded great. Lisa was right. The Stefan family had the great honor this weekend of attending not one, but 4 showings of The Music Man. And so I was thrilled to, it was fun. I was thrilled to just sing a song that was not about a trombone. It was great. It's great to do that with you all. Welcome to Dwell Church. We are 16-month-old experiment. The experiment is what happens when you build a church on the following core values. We want to be Jesus-centered, research-based, trauma-informed, diverse, and affirming and inclusive. And the early returns are it's heck of fun to build a church like that. I'm having a great time with you all. And I'm thrilled out of my mind to be sharing some important financial updates today. But if you are just joining us for the very first time, we would love to stay connected with you. So through the QR code on the signs in the back or the back of your chair or right here, it'd be awesome if you jumped on our emailing list so you could find out all the fun things that are going on at Dwell Church. I will mention a few of them. And then we'll continue on with our series called Level Up. Excited about that too. But let's talk some about where Dwell Church is at financially. And this is always exciting because, who knows if the clicker's going to work. Luckily, Angela's a professional. Wrong direction. Okay, here we go. Building the sustainable foundation of Dwell Church. So, Dwell Church has been doing this without a net. We don't have a denomination. We don't have a sending organization. And that has some pros. We get to be agile and unique, and it has some cons. If something goes wrong, we got nothing. We got no net. So it's been very exciting to be doing this. And people are signing up to help with this, to build Dwell Church, because they believe in what we're doing, what we're working on. So that's part of what has been so amazing to me in this journey, is to watch people stand up and say, yes, that is a church I want to see in the world. So here are some updates. This was our original giving model. I'll walk through it in a second. What made it possible for Dwell Church to get started is we received a large grant from an organization called the Center for Church Innovation. The first allocation was designed for one person to work for 1 year in designing and planting a church. But we had a hunch that a bunch of people were going to sign up and want to see a church like Dwell Church happen. So we just sort of went for it. Instead of financing one person, we were financing 2 with that money. And instead of a year, we took a shorter runway. And then we thought a year after that first allocation, we would receive the second allocation. Because we're the first people to receive this grant, it took a really long time to get that second allocation. So whereas it was supposed to come in last November, it came in last week. So we've been working really hard to keep Dwell Church afloat in that time. Very exciting stuff. So what we wanted to do was to develop a more transparent approach to finances. That's an important part of Dwell Church. So we also wanted to make the sort of giving model a little more accessible. When I was growing up, maybe if you've been to church before, you've heard that you're supposed to give 10% of your income. And for most of my adult life, I never did that because it was really difficult. If someone had told me when I was 20 years old, if you gave $50, that would make a real measurable difference at church, I would have done it. And that would have started me on a very different journey of generosity. And so that's part of the reason we designed this, is that the entry points are more accessible for people that have maybe never been to church before in their life. This is something that is a little bit more comprehensible. So the model here is, instead of saying kind of a broader and vaguer request, that it would feel a little bit more empowering if you knew exactly what you were giving and why it was important. So a very smart person at Dwell Church helped us design this. And the goal here is to develop 50 financial partners, 20 who are giving at $50 a month, 15 who are giving at $300 a month, 8 who are giving at $750 a month, 5 who are giving at $1,500, and 2 who are giving at $3,000 a month. And you can see how that breaks down. The key for us, though, was to arrive at $25,000 a month, because that's sort of like the tipping point where Dwell Church now can continue indefinitely based on that real minimum baseline sustainability. What that affords us to do is to rent a place like this, to pay 2 staff people, and then to pay our bills like insurance, a couple of other things, but then also make a couple of gifts out into strategic partners out in the world. So that's what we're able to afford at $25,000 a month. And if you've been tracking along, we've been working really hard to get there. Because, gosh, we are feeling like this is a church where people can dwell in the presence of Jesus. And so we want to make that possible. And that's why we've been working here. So we kind of had between the first allocation and the second allocation of that grant to arrive at sustainability. And I said that when that second allocation of the grant arrived, that we would give an update here. So here's what we are right now. We have 52 financial partners across the great United States, and we are at $22,650 per month. You guys, that is incredible. Yes. We have 4 church plant coaches, and we do that to offset the lack of other networks that we have. Like, we're certainly not smart enough to be doing this ourselves. So we try to get not only lots of input from you. One thing we talk about is being a listening church. We also want to get a lot of input from external voices who've walked this road previously. And what those 4 church plant coaches tell me is that is an incredible number. That is a miraculous number. And what it indicates is that people are just saying yes to building Dwell Church. So if that's you, I want to thank you deeply and truly. We got to witness a miracle here together. Now, what is amazing about this second allocation of our grant is that the total sum now that this organization has given us is $250,000. That's an enormous amount of money for a church plant like ours. And as I said, that first allocation was sort of the launch funds for Lisa and I to get this thing off of the ground. And what we hoped was if we arrived at sustainability by the time that second allocation came, that second allocation would be for growth purposes, strategic investments. So we were pushing really hard to get to sustainability so that all of that grant money could go towards growing and building Dwell Church. So what that originally, here's some backstory of how our giving has developed. This was last September. We had 29 financial partners for a total of 13,000. And then in March of this year, we had 39 financial partners, and that was for a total of $17,000 per month. And that is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. That is already a remarkable number. And now, then in April, we kind of talked about it a lot in March. In April, we got one more financial partner, so was really grateful for that person. And then now, as we said, June 2025, we have 52 partners and $22,650 coming in per month funding this baby. It's pretty amazing. Okay, here last September, when we thought that we were going to be getting the second half of this grant a year from the first half, we started mapping out how would we spend this. And we were saying if we could get to $25,000 a month, it would all go towards Dwell Kids and the other things. But we were prognosticating, and our projections were that we were probably not going to get to $25,000 a month. And so we originally earmarked 40% of it to go to our partnership here to pay our rent for 6 to 8 months so that we would have additional runway to arrive at $25,000. This was our first model. And because we're so darn close to $25,000 a month, what we're now doing is this. Only 15% of this grant is going to go towards paying the bills. And the rest of it is going to go towards developing, as you can see, 65% of that large sum of money is going to be going towards developing Dwell Kids and Dwell students. So that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. So we're going to pay some of our salary with that. We have something that we've been calling hallmarks of legitimacy to sort of like communicate to curious people that we're no longer duct taped together in the launch phase, but that like our website looks a little better and our video works every week. We want to do some of those things. So you might remember early on, it didn't work. The clicker, it's been working for like 7 weeks in a row. So we're getting there. You're probably right. You're probably right. We were calling those hallmarks of legitimacy. So we're going to invest in a few more of those. But far and away, the vast bulk of this, because you guys have been building Dwell Church, we're going to be able to spend it on building, rebooting our Dwell Kids ministry and developing kids and a student ministry here at Dwell Church. So here are the dollar numbers attached to this. We're going to pay $25,000 to George Hall Elementary. That already is incredible, right? We're going to spend $15,000 on hallmarks of legitimacy and our current staff salary. And then $95,000 of this budget are going to go towards relaunching Dwell Kids and developing kids and students. When we originally mapped out those strategic action plans, that dollar figure was much lower. And so we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and make sure that we have really thought through how best to spend those funds to build Dwell Church. So what? We have that money burning a hole in our pocket. So it's not in a year, it's just whatever we think strategically will build these ministries. We already have teams of builders put together to reboot Dwell Kids and then to launch Dwell Students. So those teams are underway in thinking and dreaming, but their budget has increased. And so how we might do that, we have been afforded the opportunity to dream and pray together what that might look like. So that is enormously exciting. Some of those things are underway now so that they're ready for the fall. And we don't have to spend all of this money right now for certain. But what we will do is make sure that we're spending it wisely in a way that keeps growing Dwell Church. So this was incredibly remarkable stuff. And I just, I don't know, I'm glad beyond what I could possibly articulate and grateful for you all. We got to witness something pretty amazing there. So thank you if you are financially partnering with Dwell Church. If you're not, and this feels like your spiritual home and you want to help us get to $25,000 a month, each month that we get closer to that goal, more of that grant goes towards kids and students. So we're right there. We're so close. If this is a juncture of your life where that doesn't seem like the right next spiritual step for you, that's completely okay. But if this is your spiritual home, you want to help keep building Dwell Church, that is one meaningful way to do it. So why don't you all give yourselves a round of applause? That's pretty amazing stuff. There are moments and milestones in our journey together where I'm never quite sure how best to celebrate them. Is it like just start hugging everyone on our birthday? I was like, what do we do for this? So if you are the type of person where it would be meaningful for me to give you a hug or 2 hugs after this, I would love to do so. So much fun to celebrate these milestones with you. Okay, we've been talking about how to level up your conversation with Jesus, and I just had so much fun thinking about this with you all this week. I'm going to recap some last week, but today we're going to talk about being rigorously honest, and there's going to be some parts of this that I think are really challenging for us. So I just want to say that up front. There's some real challenging bits here. I like the table imagery here because it's essential for us to really imagine, to get a powerful sort of like redeemed, sanctified bit of imagination going as we lean into what it looks like and feels like to talk to Jesus. Because the center of the target for human life is conversational relationship with Jesus. That is what you were made for. This is what we were made to do. And last week, we talked some about what that conversation looks like based on who the other person in the conversation is. What is God really like? And this week, we're going to talk about maybe the best way to level up your conversation with Jesus is to be rigorously honest. And then next week, we're going to talk about what does it look like to be talking with Jesus out in the world about places that you go, places that you work, your family, what you're doing. Your conversation takes on a whole new texture when you're talking to Jesus out in the world because it turns out he's already at work out there doing something. You're just going to be able to team up with him. But for now, let's think about what we were talking about last week. What does it feel like to talk with God? What God is like is maybe the most important question you will ever answer. It is easy to get an idea of God who is far off and disinterested or up close and angry and watching your every move. The Bible has nothing to do with either of those gods, describes him very differently. Here's a couple of foundational dwell texts for what God's tone of voice is like. Week 1, who we're talking to, did that. Dallas Willard, a famous philosopher who's also a deep and vibrant follower of Jesus. He wrote this: "To Jesus' eyes, this is a God-bathed and God-permeated world. It is a world filled with a glorious reality. It is a world that is inconceivably beautiful and good because of God and because God is always in it. It is a world in which God is continually at play and over which he constantly rejoices. Until our thoughts of God have found every visible thing and event glorious with his presence, the word of Jesus has not yet fully seized us." What was the word of Jesus? He said this: "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The person on the other end of the conversation is the one who is gentle and humble in heart. Patron saint of Dwell Church, Pete Holmes, put it this way: "When we're with God, it feels like we are spacious. We feel spacious, we feel liberated, we feel unburdened. Burden light, yoke easy." You and I have an invitation each and every day to enter into conversation with the one who can cause us to feel unburdened and spacious. This is the promise of conversation with Jesus. We also talked last week about models of the faith journey. I think this is really helpful stuff. Good to revisit. Let me go back. The model that we looked at last time had 6 stops. The first was that you feel safe in your environment. This is how all children start. Lots of kids come to church. That's a safe place. They don't know any better. Level 2, you know the stages, or you know the stories and the content. You're learning all the stories. You're learning the theology. You're like, this is what this place is about. Here it is. Stage 3, the belonging and identity stage. It feels like you're comfortable with the answers provided by your community, and you're ready to mind the boundary between communities. This was me in high school. I loved arguing about theology. That's what this phase feels like. You're arguing about the information that you learned in the previous 2. And then stage 4, the why stage, is where it all falls apart. And if you've been through a stage of life where your faith fell apart, then you are right on the way towards growing a deeper faith. That is a fundamental part of following Jesus. The why stage feels like questioning assumptions and may even lead to a temporary loss of faith as you search for your own answers. The research that this is based on tells us that that is a good, important part. Now, when I was growing up, you weren't allowed to cross from stage 3 to stage 4. And if you've been to a church where you didn't get to ask a lot of questions, then you might have felt stuck the way that I did. But what that church was doing to us was saying, you can't grow past a certain point in your maturity with Jesus. They were holding me back. They were holding you back. Now, the reason they were doing that is because stage 4 is really scary, where we learn we're actually in control of almost nothing. And I can see why people want to avoid that stage. It can be quite painful. In stage 5, you move beyond the box and you start to see the bigger picture and understand complexity. And in stage 6, the unconditional love stage, you might imagine a wise person who lives out profound love and justice for all. Now, one thing I didn't mention last week that I think is really important to imagine is that it's quite possible to go backwards several stages. That's a normal part of it. This is but one quite linear model of faith development. There are other ones that are more of an upward spiral that I thought didn't make a real good slide, so we went with this one. But if you feel like, oh man, I'm back to the beginning, that is an okay place to be. That is part of the upward spiral that God has planned for you. In fact, today I was thinking, I actually visit all of these stages every Sunday afternoon as we're setting up. Sometimes I'm like, I love these people, and sometimes I'm like, why are we doing this? So it's quite natural to experience this in nonlinear ways. That would be a very normal thing. But the heuristic purpose of this is to help us imagine, especially when we're talking about prayer, there are stages of our faith journey where prayer feels very different. Very different than it did before, very different than it will. Your conversation with Jesus takes on the texture of the stage that you are in, is what we are learning here. And last week I gave 3 images. If you're imagining the person who's sitting across from you, what are they like? There's a park bench. I try to draw a picture of what God looked like. He was a black man in a flannel, and his head was like this beautiful sunset, and it looked terrible, and I tried to use AI to do it. It didn't work at all. But what Pete Scazzaro says, the author of the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality book and whole series, whole franchise, is that when you enter prayer, it's much less about getting something than it is meeting someone. So you need to have a clear, crisp imagination that you are meeting someone there. Then the next one was Pigpen. Remember this guy from Charlie Brown? He's covered in dust. He was actually quite philosophical about it. He said, the dust of countless ages of history rests upon me. That's kind of an amazing thing to say, actually. We were talking about an ancient rabbinical blessing. Jesus was a rabbi, and when you agreed to study under a rabbi, they would pray over you, may the dust of your rabbi's sandals rest upon your face. And what that meant was that you were following your rabbi so closely, watching his every move and learning everything that you possibly could from him. What we have the opportunity to do is to enter into life-changing conversation with Jesus every single day, to the point where we could even say, I'm following my teacher out into the world, into my marriage, as a parent, everything that happens to me, I'm following the teacher. And finally, butt dust. Together, we read Psalm 103, which has this amazing phrase where God remembers that you are but dust. And there's a famous typo on the internet of this right here, which is an Ash Wednesday bulletin. Remember that you are but dust, and to dust you shall return. Psalm 103 is about God remembering how fragile and limited you and I are. And this is supposed to teach us in a very memorable way, including the word but with 2 T's, that across from the table in our conversation with Jesus, the other person that we are talking with has quite a deep tenderness for you. That when you show up barely dragging yourself into the moment of prayer, as I often do, God isn't disappointed and saying, is that the best that you could do? He's saying, I understand that you are made of dust. That it was a bold, disciplined, heartfelt moment of seeking me to even show up to this conversation. Oftentimes I can work my spiritual habits and rhythms in a way that makes me feel like, I think I'm doing this wrong. And if you have had that sensation that I think I'm doing this wrong, that is not what God thinks. God thinks, oh, here is someone who has showed up to meet with me. And so we have to get God's tone of voice right as we imagine this conversation. Today we're talking about one way to level up your conversation, which is rigorous honesty. And today we're especially going to talk about a concept that is sometimes called, here are two forms of rigorous honesty that I think are really helpful. Sometimes we need permission to say something that seems aggressive to God. And I'm going to give you that permission later in this talk. But there's another kind where sometimes we just need to be real rigorous about who we are. And the more rigorous we are about who we really are, the deeper our conversation with God will be. And we'll see, because we're talking about the capacity for human beings to live out of a false self. I remember exactly where I was when I realized I was living out of a false version of myself. It was 1998. It's the summer of 1998. Maybe June of 1998. We could say that maybe. And one of my best friends was dropping me off after soccer practice. And he drove a red Toyota truck, 1.8 liter. It's barely moving down the road, and we went everywhere in this beater. It was amazing. And my friend, whose name was also Matt, because if you were born in 1982, pretty good chance you were named Matt. He went to my church. We talked about the Bible all the time. We did everything together. We were on the soccer team. We were in choir together. This was my number one confidant at the time. And later in that summer, in the way of Midwestern boys becoming men, he punched me in the face. And I had braces on at the time, and so I got him way worse than he got me. And later his mom was like, oh, Matt, what happened to your hand? And Matt, what happened to your face? And we were both like, what a mystery. And I will always treasure this guy's prayer for me and for Katie at my bachelor party. This is an amazing friend. In the summer of 1998, I had a dawning awareness that I had something within me that I needed to confess. So we're driving home from soccer practice one summer day. And he pulled up in front of my house, and I said, Matt, I think I have to tell you something. And he looked at me, and we thought about it for a moment in this awkward silence. Pretty remarkable for two young men who were trained to talk about nothing in their house. And so I said to him, I think I have a deep desire to have people think that I'm smarter than I actually am. And he thought about it for a minute, and he said, I know that. Everybody who knows you knows that. And we love you anyways. I shared something true with him, and he received it with grace and kindness. It was a moment where I realized I'd been living out of something false and wanted to step into something truer. And what I was experiencing was what is captured in Richard Rohr's book, The Immortal Diamond, the search for our true self. One of the great tasks of your life will be to live into truer and truer versions of yourself. And if you had told me that when I was 16 and telling my buddy that I was trying to fool people, then you would have had, I would have been completely mystified by this. But if you've lived a little more in life, you know how it can feel to have to choose between a false and a true version of yourself. Richard Rohr says this: the false self is all the things we pretend to be and think we are. It's the pride and arrogance, the title, the costume, the role, and degree we take ourselves to be. It's almost entirely created by our minds, our cultures, or our families. If you were given a role in your family and you're forced to live that role, someday you will step out and be like, I don't have to be this. Pretty amazing. He goes on to say this: the false self is more like a starter kit or a launching pad for life, a necessary phase in development. However, the problem arises when we do not let go of our false self at the right time and in the right way. That's precisely what it means to be stuck, trapped, and addicted to yourself. See, as a kid, when you're learning something, it's okay to want to know the right answer. As an adult, having to prove that you always have the right answer is a serious vice. That's what was happening to me that I was processing through after soccer practice one day. He goes on to say the false self feels like this. It is an idealized version of yourself. It is a disembodied version. He means it's happening mostly in your mind. It is a limitless version of yourself, a superior version of yourself, a separate version of yourself, and ultimately an unstable version of yourself. And as we unpack this together, we'll see why. But the unstable version is, if it's false, you have to constantly try to prove that it's true. And if you've lived a lie, you know that you have to give lots and lots of explanations for that, right? If something's true, people can see that it's true. You don't have to explain anything. If it's a lie, you have to give a long, detailed explanation to try to get away with it. And that is because the false self is unstable. Now, there's all kinds of Bible verses about this. I just picked two. Jesus said in Mark 8:34, after calling the multitude to himself with his disciples, he said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. If you've read the Gospels, you know that there are parts that sound just like the other parts, just like the other books. And you're like, why is this repeated so much? The answer is they were using a shared document. And that shared document had in it this phrase, any person who would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. That is one of the oldest statements attributed to Jesus. It's mentioned 3 times in the book of Mark and once in Luke and once in Matthew. It's like they're saying this is absolutely the core of the message. And so Paul quoted it too. I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but somehow Christ lives within me. They are describing, what they're describing is the false version of yourself dying. So people who have been following Jesus for a long time have this strange experience where somehow as I become like Jesus, the more I feel like myself. And I have felt that way. The more of my life I turn over to Jesus, it is not as if I am erased and no longer part of the equation. That's not what Paul is saying, that I have died and now only Jesus lives there. What he is saying is that somehow Jesus has taught me a truer version of myself. The more I become like Jesus, the more I feel like myself. People have been saying this all through Christian history. That's not it. Uh-oh. Who knows where we're at now? Help me, Angela. That was the last one? Okay, I'll just tell you what the rest says. Soren Kierkegaard, who thought of himself as a complete loner. He was a philosopher in early colonial Amsterdam. And he said, he opened one of his books this way, and now with God's help I shall become myself. And then Calvin, of course, somewhat famously said, without knowledge of yourself, there is no knowledge of God. And what they're capturing is, we're back! What they're capturing is this deep truth that the false self has to die. And here's why this is extremely pertinent today. It is often the case that God will not talk to our false selves. That is how you level up. And so what do we do with the reality that generally speaking, God doesn't talk to us when we're living out of our false selves? Do you know why he doesn't talk to your false self? Because that thing is not real. And the painful journey that life will take you on is by living into your true self so that you can have a real live relationship with someone else. So what does this true self look like? Rich Villodas, if you know this dude, he once wrote this: those who are poor in spirit have nothing to prove, nothing to protect, and nothing to possess. He is describing a true version of someone. What if I just got to show up in the world with nothing to prove? I would never be defensive. I would always be able to say that I was sorry about something. My apologies would be thorough and swift because I had nothing to prove. I had nothing to protect, nothing to possess. See, what I'm proving, what I'm protecting is the false version of myself that I have to work so hard to prop up. So here is the helpful contrast. The true self is real and whole and wise and humble and connected and grounded. And what we get when we pray honest prayers is we get to say, God, I feel stuck right now. I don't know what to do for my spiritual habits. Here's a question that I can't answer, and I don't think I can follow you unless I have a good answer for this question. I don't know what to do with this person. I don't like my job right now. I don't like my spouse right now. Sometimes even I don't like my life right now. That is your true self talking to God. Those are the prayers that God answers. And so if nothing else, if you want to level up that conversation with God, start praying those aggressively honest prayers. There is, as I've said, another kind of honesty. Sometimes teachings on prayer will be framed, how do you talk to God in such a way so as to get him to do what you want? And we've been intentionally framing it in a completely different way. Because talking to God so that you get what you want from him is like the smallest way of thinking of prayer. One of the models that we saw last week was communication, communion, and then union. You are on a journey to connect deeply with God. That is what your life is about. But God knows that we are small and limited people, and so he lets us ask for all kinds of things, and he is very generous with his answers. Because that's where we begin. That's where I begin all of my prayers. God, would you just help me get my kids to musical theater camp today? Very simple, very basic prayers. But then there is the reality that if you've been praying for very long, you know that sometimes when you ask God for something, what he tells you is no. And I have journeyed with so many people through death's door and into the far country, and either they or a loved one prayed very deeply, God, please don't let that happen. And it did. And what we learn in that moment is that in the company of the suffering, there is no room for the false self. All you can do is be honest. And this is a different kind of honesty that you have great permission to do, which is to be very angry at God's decision. You get to tell him all about it. And in this framework, this model of prayer, when God doesn't do what you asked, it isn't because you didn't pray the right way. It isn't because you didn't have enough faith. It's because God, for whatever reason that is kept only unto him, said no to your very heartfelt request. And you get to tell him, I hated that. And you get to tell him that because that's about what 40% of the 150 Psalms is about. People saying, God, why? When Jesus says, why have you forsaken me on the cross? He is quoting Psalm 22 that gives you every license to say something as honest as why have you abandoned me? In fact, it tells us that it is an act of deep faith to be honest with God. See, the act of doubt is to live out of the false self. So I'm sure he has a plan. There's a silver lining here somewhere. He gives his strongest warriors his biggest assignments. That's all false self stuff. And you and I are invited to be rigorously honest with God, to tell him how we feel. Some people need that permission, but for others, I know it's terrifying. And that's how every person feels as they step out of their false self. I was terrified to tell my friend that. That to that date in my life was the scariest thing that ever happened to me, that I was briefly honest with my friend. And any person who has to step out of their false self for one reason or another experiences that terror of real vulnerability. And that is the true gem, the true treasure that we're going to give to God. My raw, vulnerable, unguarded, unprotected, unpossessed self. That's the journey of honesty with God. And so maybe right now you got to be honest with God for a moment. Each week we do 2 minutes of silence. Typically it's during the songs, and it's lovely. But now we're going to do it here to give ourselves a moment to be honest with God, to say maybe this is too scary for me, or I have real problems with you right now, God, or here's something that has been holding me back in my life that I've now associated with my false self. We'll just take a few minutes to be silent and to be honest. Jesus, would you be with us? Much like these 45 minutes we've spent together, Lord, we are living in the tension of praising you and of complaining to you. And somehow, as we move between those moments, you teach us to trust you. So God, together we lift up all of these brave and courageous and rigorously honest prayers that were just prayed. Sometimes about ourselves, or sometimes about another person or circumstance where we were finding it just painful. We lift all that up to you. Thank you for your enduring promise that you are with us in all of it. Would you send here to these people, Lord, the power and presence of your Holy Spirit so that they could take a step deeper into their conversation with you. God, I have so often found you so beautiful and so alluring and so kind to me, and I have so often been so heartbroken and disappointed and frustrated. And all of that together we lift up to you, Jesus. We love you, Lord. Amen.